All right. Now, as we know, the greatest Prime Minister of all time, he's not focused on upgrades for himself when it comes to personal travel. He's not interested in making sure that he's got a multi-million-dollar retirement plan just in case you, the electorate, don't give him 17 terms as Prime Minister. No. He's a person who is focused, like us, on the number one issue in the country.
A plan to address cost of living, take pressure off cost of living, pressure off the cost of living, cost of living relief, downward pressure on cost of living.
And I don't know about you, but, Albanomics has worked, hasn't it? I mean, he promised at the start of the last campaign that everything would be cheaper, and I don't know about you. I mean, everything's gone down since the last election. Oh, no, that's right. That's just Australians' confidence and trust in government. Now, we also know today about just who was being taken care of and focused today, the real priority when it comes to cost of living. Was it small business, where today you could read a story that Aussie couples who run small businesses, they've had to go without money to keep their own businesses afloat. In fact, self-employed small business owners are paying themselves less at the same time as inflation has smashed their buying power, resulting in an 18% collapse in real income for somebody who owns a small business since Labor took office. The decline comes as food prices, energy, insurance, rent and wage increases have all fuelled a surge in hospitality businesses, which have shuttered at a now 9.3% rate in February. That is, of all of the businesses, almost 10%. In small business, particularly focused in and around, cafes, restaurants, they've closed. Oh, no, it wasn't their cost of living. What about the effects that the cost of living crisis has had on poorer and vulnerable Australians? Was that the focus? Is that what we're going to be having a national conversation about in the next few days? Well, no, even though there's an article that you could read today, available online, available in the newspapers, that shows the cost of living crunch has actually resulted in an increase in child neglect. Australia's cost of living crisis has been linked to a record 307,022 child abuse and neglect notifications. Can I just repeat that number? 307,000 neglect notifications. That's up 12% over the past 2 years. Why? Inflation. Difficulties when it comes to somewhere to live, either the one that you're renting or the one that you are paying for. No. Today, the Prime Minister was out there fighting for the cost of living of lazy public servants. Now, not all public servants are lazy, but there's an awful lot of them that are. This is after, of course, he's already hired an extra 39,000 of them. And as we know, the Coalition is planning to bring the public sector back to pre-COVID levels, i.e., they're going to trim some of the fat. They think that Australia does not need an extra 40,000 public servants doing the jobs on top of the hundreds of thousands that already cost us billions and billions of dollars each and every year. In fact, here is the shadow finance spokesperson whom, if Dutton becomes Prime Minister, will be in charge of the public service.
We think that the 36,000 public servants that have been brought on haven't demonstrated that the improvements to the services to the public have been corresponding. We think we can bring it back down to levels that were at the end of COVID, not the beginning of COVID, I might add, at the end of COVID.
And part of what they want to do is to get public servants to go back to the office that is already paid for by the taxpayer. You see, not just because they're nasty and evil, but they want people to go back so that all the cafes, the restaurants, all of the businesses, the cleaners, all the rest of it that actually service those buildings will be able to remain employed. Oh, no, but the Prime Minister has come out today and his focus, while Grim Jim's $25 a month power nonsense is what they want to distract you with, today he says that getting more public servants than ever before to stay working at home will help them with the cost of living. You see, one of the reasons why a public servant doesn't have to go back to the office that we're already paying for is because they would have to use some of their own money to get to work, just like every other person who has to get themselves to work, let alone a small business, who, of course, is going backwards under this government. But nothing to see here. Here's the Prime Minister picking the cushy life of a public servant over small business and over kids in neglect today, because this is what he chose to talk about.
Working from home has enabled them to work full-time, and therefore it has increased workforce participation.
This guy. Now, after the budget this week, the expectation is the election could be called as early as next weekend. We will have Peter Dutton at a special pub test on the following Monday. So not this, but next Monday in his electorate. I want you to check out the questions that people have got, because we've got a nice full room and people have got plenty of questions for the alternative Prime Minister. Of course, the media between now and then will do everything they can to boost the current Prime Minister, trying to pretend you that everything is better, despite the fact that, well, every indice, from child abuse to small businesses, have shown that this joint has gone backwards fast under the current mob. Which brings us to the buy-offs that are planned for this week. Forget what they promised 3 years ago, that cost of living would be cheaper. No. They're the government now, so we'll just hand out billions more on top of the billions already promised. Now, as you know, Labor is the side of politics that decided to get rid of the energy system that worked, and it worked for decades. Because, of course, it was powered by coal. Evil, awful, nasty coal. You know, the type of stuff that the Ukraine has been asking us to send them to help power their country in a time of war. No, we're better than that. So we decided to blow up what worked before we had spent the hundreds of billions of dollars to replace it with what now we know does not. We also know that this is the government that in one of their first acts as government decided to have everyone stand around as they signed a piece of paper saying that we will now set a law in this country that Australia will cut 43% of 1% of the world's emissions, and we will in part do it with more than 80% renewable energy. Of course, they say that it's the cheapest form of energy, and it may well be in 30 years' time, but right now it has to be built. And as you know, it's tens of thousands of solar panels each and every day. Oh, yeah, made by slave labour in China, but shh. Wind farms, hundreds of thousands of those that'll be needed, both onshore, offshore. Bugger the birds, who cares about the dolphins? No, we must destroy the earth in order to save the atmosphere. And all of this was apparently going to cut your power bills. Now, I won't play the same thing that we've played hundreds of times since the last election, but you remember the promise. 275, 275, 275, 275. That was the promise. That basically take your power bill from May of 2022, compare it to the one in May, or right now, the end of March, April of 2025, and it'll be $275 cheaper. Why? Because we've moved from that evil, awful coal and we've replaced it with all the stuff that is so much cheaper. The only problem is the cost of transition. The CSIRO once told us was $1 trillion, but now they say it's $500 billion, but apparently we all know that it's a little higher than that. And of course, it has all of the destruction that goes with it. But because they have failed to deliver on that promise, and again I say it for the umpteenth time, Tony Abbott promised in 2013 to stop the boats. If he had not stopped the boats, but in fact more boats were turning up by 2016, unless of course the ghost had already knifed him, what do you think the reaction would have been of the Canberra Press Gallery? Apparently this promise just doesn't matter. It's never mattered to them because it was lipstick on the pig. It's exactly the same policy that Bill Shorten was defeated in with 2019, but in 2022, if we tell everyone they're going to get a power bill cut, they'll vote for it. And they did. So they either screwed up or they lied. And I think it's pretty obvious that they lied, right? And 12 months ago, when they were delivering what they then thought would be the final budget, ahead of what they were planning, could be an early election as soon as the back half of last year, but definitely not as late this year. But we all know that the storms have cost the federal budget $1.2 billion. OK, rightio. They made a promise, and that promise was that they would pay $300 off everyone's power bill. And then you start doing the sums. Well, of course, most people pay their power bills quarterly, so that was like $775. And then if you divide that between the number of months that are in a quarter, it's $25. $25 a month. And there's no means testing, meaning the biggest mansion with the most cashed up person in Australia, they got the same relief as somebody that was on the bones of their backside in a shack in the bush. Because who could be bothered administering this policy? What, of course, they wanted was a multi-billion-dollar slogan for an election, that a tax cut for every Australian, sure, the people who needed it, it was $14 a week, and a power bill cut for every Australian for those who needed it Again, just $25 a month. All of this costs multiple billions of dollars, and they don't give you the money, they pay the power bills of the power companies that just happen to, in many cases, be the same companies that are getting government subsidies to spend the hundreds of billions of dollars to build the new electricity grid that, fingers crossed, one day will be cheaper than what currently works. And if you've been paying any attention to the inconsistencies in this, then you, of course, are the problem. We are the climate deniers. Of course, I've never denied that if you have 7, 8 billion people on the planet, multiple industrial revolutions, that you're probably going to do something to the natural ecosystem. And certainly Australia is part of a globe and needs to do its bit. But if we're 1% of the world's problem, 1% of the world's problem, we should look to countries like, say, China that are 30-something% of the problem. When do they have to get to net zero? 2050 like us? Oh, no, 2060. The United States has done the hokey pokey, both being out and then in and then out and then in of the Paris Agreement, and they're, what, 20-something%? So they're not agreeing to this system. And then there's the third world, developing countries, the global south, as the lefties like to call them. Oh, they don't have to apply to this either. Then there's India, then there's Russia, and countries like China get to call themselves developing countries. So again, despite the fact they've got a space station and have held the Olympics twice this century, no, they must be treated like the country, like a country in Africa that can't keep its head above water. Of course. So Australia signs the piece of paper and continues on a path despite the fact that, well, more than half, we're kind of getting close to 2/3, but let's say over half of the planet is not playing the same game that we're playing. But this government, of course, says that there is a moral need for us to do this so they can go off and either go to climate conferences or spend hundreds of millions of dollars for us to host climate conferences, because, you see, they don't care. Because they're the ones that have got 3 pay rises, Prime Minister's on $600,000, Ministers on $400,000. Most of the people in charge of the businesses or spinning for the businesses or the ones setting the rules, they've got hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Oh, small business, whatever. But can I have a latte, please? Oh, how's everything going? Oh, that's a shame, isn't it?